His eyes found mine across the golden throne room, and I knew my life would never be the same. The weight of his gaze was like fire and ice, burning through my borrowed dress, seeing everything I tried to hide. I shouldn't have been there, a servant girl among royalty. But fate has a cruel sense of humor. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're watching from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. I shouldn't have been there. I knew it the moment I crossed the threshold of the Golden Hall that my presence would be an affront to everything sacred in this place. The air felt heavy, saturated with the perfume of noble ladies and the rustle of silk. And yet, I moved like someone invading a temple uninvited. I was placed at the margins, as always, daughter of no one, raised by pity in the shadows of a house that didn't belong to me. The invitation wasn't mine. It belonged to Lady Elvire, my protector of convenience, who dressed me in a borrowed gown and ordered me to stay silent, invisible, useful only as an obedient ornament in her shadow. But I had learned long ago that shadows can sometimes be the most dangerous places to hide. My fingers trembled as I smoothed the unfamiliar fabric of the dress, emerald silk that whispered against my skin like secrets. It was too fine for someone like me, too beautiful for hands that knew only scrubbing floors and mending tears. The bodice felt tight around my ribs, as if it were trying to contain something wild that lived inside my chest. "Remember," Lady Elvire had hissed in my ear before we entered, her breath sharp with wine and authority, "you are nothing here, less than nothing. If anyone notices you, it will be my ruin as well as yours." Her fingers had dug into my arm like talons, leaving marks I could still feel beneath the long sleeves. But fate has an acidic taste, and sometimes, without warning, it pushes the unwanted into the center of the stage. That's what happened that night. The throne room glittered under the light of 1,000 candles. The music, discreet and arrogant, pretended neutrality while sharp gazes cut down the less worthy. Nobles moved like predators in elaborate dance, their laughter brittle as breaking glass. I searched for a corner, a discreet seat by the columns where I could disappear into the marble and shadows. My heart hammered against my ribs as I navigated through the crowd, keeping my eyes downcast, trying to make myself smaller than I already was. The scent of roses and wine hung heavy in the air, mixing with something else, power perhaps, or the metallic taste of fear that coated my tongue. I should have stayed by the wall. I should have remained invisible as I'd been taught. But guided by nervousness and the desperate need to escape the cutting stares of the courtiers, I found myself moving toward what I thought was an empty alcove. My vision blurred with anxiety, my hands shaking as I gathered the silk skirts to sit. The cold of marble seeped through the thin fabric of my dress, and the silence that followed seemed like a held breath throughout the entire court. I realized with growing horror that I had sat where I shouldn't have, beside the steps of the throne itself. The golden seat loomed above me like a judgment, and I felt the weight of 100 stares pressing down on my shoulders. No one dared warn me immediately, perhaps for the pleasure of watching my fall. The nobles stood frozen like statues, their fans paused mid-flutter, their conversations dying on painted lips. Even the musicians seemed to falter, their melody becoming uncertain and thin. My cheeks burned with shame as understanding crashed over me like a cold wave. I had violated the most sacred rule of the court. Only royal blood could rest near the throne. I was about to scramble to my feet to run and hide and never show my face again, when everything changed. Then he moved. The king. The man they said cast no shadow. Only presence. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a gaze that didn't belong to common humanity, he rose like an ancient force deciding at last to awaken. His eyes, an impossible colour to name, somewhere between storm clouds and winter seas, swept the hall until they settled on me. And for an instant that lasted an eternity, everything ceased, the murmur, the strings, the contained laughter. I felt the weight of the world land on my shoulders, the blush rise to my skin, my heart betray me inside my chest. The air seemed to thicken around us, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful, like lightning or the edge of a blade. His dark hair was pulled back severely, revealing the sharp angles of his face, the strong line of his jaw. There was something predatory in the way he held himself, as if he was always calculating, always hunting. But it wasn't anger I saw when he approached. It was something more primitive, almost impossible to name. A recognition, an echo, something that burned and froze at the same time. Later they would say he reacted to an insult, that his wrath was inflamed by the audacity of the servant girl who sat where only royal blood could rest. But that wasn't what I witnessed in that moment of suspended time. What I saw in his eyes was hunger, raw and terrifying, and directed entirely at me. The murmur began before he even spoke, a wave of whispered shock and delicious scandal rippling through the assembled nobles. "Who is she?" someone breathed, but the question seemed to hang in the air like incense, thick and suffocating. The king descended the marble steps with deliberate slowness, each footfall echoing through the suddenly silent throne room like a heartbeat. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch as he approached with the fluid grace of a predator who has spotted his prey. My hands clutched the silk of my skirt so tightly I was sure I would tear it, but I couldn't release my grip. It was the only thing anchoring me to reality as the most powerful man in the kingdom moved toward me with those impossible eyes fixed on mine. "Who is she?" he asked, but not to the court. The question was directed at fate itself, and I heard it like thunder before a storm. The scent of the flowers adorning the hall seemed to have become too sweet, suffocating. I wanted to disappear, but my legs wouldn't obey. They felt weak as water, trembling beneath the borrowed dress. And then, when he passed by me, I saw him pause. The air changed. Sound died. He tilted his face slightly, like someone recognizing a forgotten perfume. The silence stretched between us like a taut wire, ready to snap at any moment. "How long has it been since someone dared to smell like summer?" he murmured, low almost to himself. Shame burned across my skin like fire. What I wore wasn't perfume. It was the oil of herbs that my mother, the woman of whom almost nothing could be said, had left before she died. A forbidden scent, they had told me once, because it belonged to a bloodline the king had extinguished. I never knew why, until that moment. The memory crashed over me like a wave, my mother's gentle hands as she rubbed the oil into my skin, her voice soft and sad as she whispered warnings I was too young to understand. "Hide this from them," she had said. "Hide what you are, little one, or they will take you from me too." But I had forgotten her warnings in my nervousness, had used the oil out of habit, seeking comfort in the familiar scent that reminded me of safety and love. Now it had betrayed me, marking me as surely as a brand. The ladies, in their circle of silk and malice, exchanged glances that burned with spite and contempt. Lady Elvire flushed to her ears, moving her fan with mute fury. I was the offence, the scandal, the dirt that dared to contaminate the gold of their perfect world. And the king, impassive, watched me like someone fighting against an ancient instinct. His fingers touched the arm of the throne, a minimal gesture, but enough to silence any voice that might dare to speak. The power radiating from him was tangible, pressing against my skin like heat from a forge. "Stand, all of you," he ordered, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "I want to see who among us still has the courage to look at her." No one moved. The silence became a form of prayer, desperate and fearful. I felt naked before the collective gaze, my body pulsing between shame and a strength I didn't understand. I wanted to speak, to explain, to beg forgiveness, but my voice refused to emerge from my tight throat. The king descended the last step and stopped an arm's length from me. His gaze travelled from my face to my hands, then returned to my eyes. Up close I could see the flecks of gold in his storm-coloured eyes, could smell the scent of leather and steel and something darker that made my pulse quicken. "Don't ask for forgiveness," he said, his voice low and grave, each word falling like a stone into still water. "Those born to bear the weight of others should not bow before them." The words, though whispered, echoed like a blow. The court stirred, offended. Someone let escape a hysterical laugh, quickly stifled. The sound was muffled by a gesture from him. a sharp movement of his hand that imposed silence without needing force. His presence was overwhelming, like standing too close to a fire. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the tension in his jaw as he studied my face. There was something familiar in his eyes, as if he was seeing a ghost made flesh. "Your name," he said suddenly, and it wasn't a request. My mouth felt dry as sand. "Lyra, your majesty," I managed to whisper, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. "Lyra," he repeated, and the way he said, it made my name sound like a prayer or a curse. "And your mother?" The question hit me like a physical blow. My mother, the woman I barely remembered, who had died when I was barely old enough to walk. The woman whose very existence seemed to be a secret that everyone knew but no one would speak of. She died when I was very young, Your Majesty," I stammered. His eyes darkened, and I saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. Whatever he saw in my face, whatever my answer revealed, it struck him with the force of a revelation. "Of course she did," he said softly, and there was something like pain in his voice. "They always do, and thus before everyone I became the scandal of the year. The servant girl who dared to sit beside the throne and, worse still, attracted the king's gaze. That night, no banquet was concluded, no compliments survived. When he withdrew, the hall seemed stripped of colour, and I felt that something terrible and inevitable, had been awakened. The whispers started before he had even left the room, a crescendo of speculation and venom that followed me like a shadow as Lady Elvira gripped my arm with bruising force and dragged me away from the scene of my disgrace. The days that followed my humiliation in the throne room passed like a fever dream. My life ceased to belong to me, if it ever had. The ladies whispered behind their fans whenever I passed, their voices carrying just loud enough for me to hear the poison in their words. The servants averted their eyes, as if looking at me directly might contaminate them with whatever curse I carried. Lady Elvira confined me to my chamber, a tiny room in the servants' quarters that barely contained a narrow bed and a cracked mirror. She brought my meals herself, her face a mask of barely controlled fury, and forbade me from leaving for any reason. "Do you understand what you've done?" she hissed on the second day, setting down a tray of bread and thin soup with shaking hands. "Do you comprehend the damage you've caused?" I sat on the edge of my bed, still wearing the borrowed dress because she had given me nothing else, and tried to make myself smaller. "I'm sorry, my lady. I didn't mean—" "Sorry?" Her laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Sorry doesn't restore reputations, child. Sorry doesn't explain why the king looked at you like... She couldn't finish the sentence, but I knew what she meant. I had seen it too, that hunger in his eyes, that recognition of something I didn't understand. It terrified me as much as it thrilled me, a feeling I pushed down deep because it was too dangerous to examine. "The other ladies are saying things," Lady Elvira continued, pacing the small space like a caged animal. "Terrible things about where you came from, what you might be. They're asking questions I can't answer because I don't know the answers myself." My heart clenched with a familiar pain. The mystery of my origins had always haunted me. The way conversations stopped when I entered a room, the careful way people avoided certain subjects in my presence. I had learned not to ask questions because the answers always brought more pain than knowledge. But every morning, despite Lady Elvira's prohibition, the same servant of the king came with a request that I be brought to the gardens under some foolish pretext. A summons disguised as suggestions, that I might need fresh air for my health, that a walk among the roses would restore my complexion, that the morning light would benefit my constitution. Lady Elvira had no choice but to comply. One didn't refuse the king's requests, no matter how indirect they might be. And there, among the statues covered with moss and the perfume of damp leaves, I saw him in the distance, motionless but attentive, like someone waiting for the wind to carry him to me. He never approached directly, never spoke, but his presence was a constant weight that I felt in my bones. The gardens were ancient, older than the castle itself, filled with twisting paths and hidden alcoves where courtiers had conducted secret affairs for generations. Marble nymphs posed eternally beside fountains that sang with falling water. and climbing roses had grown wild over arbours that formed natural caves of green shadow. It was in one of these shadowed places that he finally approached me. I was sitting beside a fountain, watching the water dance in the late afternoon light, when I felt his presence like a change in the air pressure. My skin prickled with awareness, and I turned to find him standing at the entrance to the alcove, his tall frame blocking out the light beyond. "You're afraid of me," he said without preamble, his voice carrying easily in the enclosed space. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Good." He stepped closer, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he maintained over himself. Fear keeps you alive in places like this. He settled onto the marble bench beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could smell that intoxicating scent of leather and steel, and something wilder that made my pulse quicken. The casual way he sat, as if we were equals, as if this meeting was perfectly natural, somehow made it more intimate and more dangerous. "Tell me about your mother," he said, his eyes fixed on the dancing water, my hands twisted in my lap. "I remember very little, Your Majesty. She died when I was barely 3 years old." "What do you remember?" The question opened doors in my mind that I usually kept locked. "Her hands," I whispered. "She had gentle hands, and she used to rub oil into my skin before bed. She would sing to me, sad songs that made her cry even as she smiled." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "What kind of songs?" "Lullabies, I think, though they felt more like morning songs. About lost kingdoms and forgotten magic." The words tumbled out before I could stop them, memories I had buried rising to the surface like bubbles in wine. "And this oil she used, you still have it?" I nodded, my cheeks burning with shame. "She left a small vial. Lady Elva doesn't know about it. I used it the night of the ball because I was nervous because it makes me feel close to her." He turned to look at me then, and the intensity in his gaze made my breath catch. "Show me." It wasn't a request. With trembling fingers, I reached into the hidden pocket of my dress where I kept the small glass vial, no bigger than my thumb, filled with golden oil that seemed to glow with its own light. I had guarded it like a treasure for years, using only the smallest amounts on special occasions or when the loneliness became too much to bear. He took it from my palm, his fingers brushing mine with a touch that sent lightning through my veins. The vial looked impossibly small in his large hands as he uncorked it and breathed in the scent. The change in him was immediate and profound. His eyes closed, his entire body going rigid as if struck by lightning. When he opened his eyes again, they were dark with something that might have been pain or longing or rage. I couldn't tell which. Where did she get this? His voice was rough, dangerous. "I don't know, Your Majesty. She never told me." He corked the vial and handed it back to me, but his hand lingered over mine for a moment longer than necessary. "Keep it hidden," he said urgently. "Never let anyone else smell it. Never let anyone else know you have it. Do you understand?" I nodded, though I understood nothing. "There are people in this court who would kill you for what's in that vial," he continued, his voice low and intense. "There are those who would see your very existence as a threat to everything they hold dear." "I don't understand." "You don't need to understand. You need to survive." His hand tightened over mine and I could feel the tremor in his fingers. "And you need to stay away from me." The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I knew they made sense. Nothing good could come from a servant girl attracting the attention of a king. But something in his voice, some note of regret or longing, made me brave enough to ask, why? He stood abruptly, putting distance between us with the swift movement of someone fleeing a fire. "Because I can't trust myself around you," he said without looking back. "And neither of us can afford the consequences of what I might do." The confession hung in the air between us like a physical thing, heavy and dangerous and impossible to take back. I watched him stride away through the garden paths, his black coat billowing behind him like the wings of some great bird of prey, and felt something shift inside my chest, a door opening that I wasn't sure I could ever close again. That night, I lay awake on my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying every word, every look, every touch. The vial of oil sat hidden beneath my pillow, warm against my palm when I dared to touch it. Whatever secret it held was powerful enough to make a king lose his composure. Dangerous enough to warrant death threats. I thought of my mother, that ghostly figure from my earliest memories, and wondered what sins she had committed that I was now paying for. Had she been a traitor? A spy? A forbidden lover? The questions circled in my mind like vultures, picking at wounds I didn't know I had. The next morning brought unwelcome visitors. I was mending a torn chemise by the window when I heard voices in the corridor outside my door. Lady Elvira speaking in hushed, urgent tones with someone whose footsteps sounded too heavy to belong to another woman. "It's impossible," Lady Elvira was saying. "The bloodline was exterminated 20 years ago. Every last one of them." "Clearly not every last one," came the reply. A man's voice, cultured and cold. "The evidence is standing right in front of us, or had you not noticed the king's reaction?" My needle stilled in my hand. They were talking about me, about bloodlines and extermination. The words sent ice through my veins even as I strained to hear more. "Lord Blackwood, surely you can't believe—" "I believe what I see, Lady Elvira. I believe in the way she smells like summer roses and old magic. I believe in the way His Majesty looked at her as if he'd seen a ghost." The man's voice dropped lower, more menacing. "And I believe that ghosts should stay buried." Lord Blackwood. I knew that name, though I'd never seen the man who bore it. He was the king's chief advisor, they said, the power behind the throne. If he saw me as a threat. "What do you propose?" "We do?" Lady Elvira asked, and I could hear the fear in her voice. "We watch. We wait. And when the time comes, we act." His footsteps moved closer to my door and I held my breath. "Keep the girl close, Lady Elvira. Don't let her out of your sight. And if she does anything at all that threatens the stability of this court, you know where your loyalties must lie." Their voices faded as they moved away, but the threat lingered in the air like smoke. I sat frozen by the window, the half-mended chemise forgotten in my lap, as the full weight of my situation settled on my shoulders. I was being watched, hunted, and I didn't even know what crime I was suspected of committing. The days passed in a haze of fear and uncertainty. Lady Elvira barely spoke to me except to deliver meals and warnings to stay in my room. The servants who had once been indifferent to my presence now gave me a wide berth, crossing themselves when they thought I wasn't looking. But the King's Garden requests continued, each one more transparent than the last. A need for me to gather herbs for the kitchens, instructions to trim the roses that grew near his favourite walking path, tasks that required my presence in places where he might happen to be taking his daily exercise. I began to understand that we were dancing around each other, two predators circling, neither willing to make the first move but unable to resist the pull between us. Every glimpse of him sent electricity through my veins. Every time our eyes met across a garden path or through a window, the air seemed to catch fire. It was during one of these orchestrated encounters that I learned the truth about my heritage. I was cutting roses in the Queen's garden, a private space that had been abandoned since the Queen's death years before, when I heard footsteps on the gravel path. I turned, expecting to see the king, but instead found an elderly woman in servant's dress approaching with a bucket of water. She was small and bent with age, her white hair covered by a simple cap, her hands gnarled with arthritis. But her eyes were sharp as flint and knowing as winter. "You have her face," she said without preamble, setting down her bucket beside the fountain. "Lady Rosalind's face, though you're darker in colouring." My hands stilled on the roses. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, child." The old woman's laugh was sad and dry as autumn leaves. "Of course you don't. They've kept you ignorant as a lamb being led to slaughter." She moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I was her maid, you know, your mother's, from the day she was born until the day she fled this place." The garden spun around me. My mother, Lady Roslyn, had lived here, had been nobility. She was the king's cousin, the old woman continued, her eyes never leaving my face. The last of the summer bloodline, the ones who could call magic from growing things. They were powerful once before the wars came and fear made the people turn against anything they didn't understand. Magic. The word hit me like a physical blow. That's impossible. Is it? The woman reached out and touched one of the roses I had been cutting. Before my eyes, the bloom opened fuller, its petals deepening to a richer red, its scent growing stronger. You've never noticed how flowers bloom brighter when you tend them? How herbs grow stronger under your touch? I had noticed. I'd always attributed it to natural skill, to careful attention. But now, looking at the rose in the woman's weathered hand, I couldn't deny what I was seeing. The king knows, she continued. He knew your mother before she fled, before the purges began, and anyone with magic in their blood was declared an enemy of the crown. Her voice grew bitter. He was the one who ordered the hunts, child. He was the one who drove your mother into exile. The world tilted sideways. The man who looked at me with such hunger, such recognition, he was my family's destroyer. Why are you telling me this? I whispered. Because you need to know what you're walking into. The old woman's grip on my arm was surprisingly strong, because the power in your blood is waking up, and there are those who would use it for their own ends, and others who would see you dead rather than risk another magical uprising. She released me and picked up her bucket, preparing to leave. Be careful who you trust, child. Your mother thought she could trust him too, once upon a time. It cost her everything. As she walked away, leaving me alone among the roses with my shattered understanding of the world, I realized that the games being played around me were far more dangerous than I had imagined. I wasn't just a servant girl who had caught a king's attention. I was the last heir to a bloodline he had tried to destroy. And somehow, impossibly, he had fallen under the same spell that had once bound him, to my mother. That night, I couldn't sleep. The old woman's words echoed in my mind like the tolling of funeral bells, each revelation more shattering than the last. I paced my small chamber like a caged animal, my thoughts churning with impossible truths. Magic, heritage, murder. My mother hadn't been just any woman. She had been nobility, family to the very man who now watched me with such intensity. And he had been responsible for destroying everything she was, everyone she loved. I pressed my hands against the cool stone of the wall, trying to ground myself in something solid as my world crumbled around me. The vial of oil seemed to burn against my skin where it rested in its hidden pocket, a tangible reminder of the power I apparently carried in my blood. As if summoned by my thoughts, a warm sensation spread from the vial through my body. I gasped, pulling my hands back from the wall to stare at them in the pale moonlight. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a faint, golden glow emanating from my fingertips. A soft knock at my door made me jump. My heart hammered as I quickly composed myself, hiding my hands in the folds of my nightgown. "Who is it?" I called softly. "A friend," came the muffled reply, a voice I didn't recognize. "Open the door. Quickly!" Every instinct screamed at me not to trust this mysterious visitor, but something in the urgency of their tone made me turn the handle. A figure in a dark, hooded cloak slipped inside, closing the door silently behind them. When they pushed back their hood, I found myself looking at a young man perhaps a few years older than myself. His hair was sandy brown, his eyes a warm hazel, and there was something earnest and trustworthy about his face that immediately put me at ease. "My name is Marcus," he said quietly. "I served your mother when she lived at court. The old woman, Sarah, sent me to find you." My breath caught. "You knew her. You knew my mother." His smile was sad but genuine. I was just a boy then, a page in the castle. But Lady Roslyn was kind to the servants, kinder than most nobles ever thought to be. When she had to leave, she made me promise to watch over you if you ever returned to court. She knew I would come here? The revelation sent another shock through my already reeling mind. She hoped you would find your way back, yes, but she also feared it. Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. There are things you need to know, things about your power, and about why the king looks at you the way he does. I sank onto my bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. Tell me. Marcus settled into the room's single chair, his expression grave. Your mother and the king. Their history is complicated. She was his closest friend growing up, his confidant, some said his true love. But when the magical bloodlines began to rebel against royal authority, when they started using their power to challenge the crown's supremacy, everything changed. The purges, I whispered, remembering the old woman's words. The king's father ordered them. But it was our current king who carried them out. He was younger then, recently crowned, struggling to maintain control of a fractured kingdom. The magical families were seen as a threat to stability, a challenge to divine royal authority. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes intense. Your mother tried to make peace. She came to him, offered to help find a solution that wouldn't require bloodshed. She believed their friendship, their connection, would protect her family. My heart clenched with dread. But it didn't. He betrayed her. The words fell like stones into still water. Whether out of political necessity or genuine fear of magical power, he gave the order for her family's execution. She escaped, barely, and fled into exile. She was already carrying you. The room spun around me. He's my father? No, Marcus said quickly. No, that's not. Your father was another man, someone she met in exile, but you carry your mother's bloodline, her power, and her face. And when the king looks at you, he sees everything he destroyed coming back to haunt him. I buried my face in my hands, overwhelmed by the magnitude of these revelations. Why doesn't he just have me killed, if I'm such a threat? Because he's tormented by guilt. Marcus's voice was gentle but certain. Because seeing you makes him remember what he lost when he chose duty over love. And because... He hesitated, as if the next words were dangerous. Because there are prophecies about the return of the summer bloodline, ancient predictions that speak of a girl who will either restore the magical families to power or destroy them utterly. Which am I supposed to be? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. That depends on the choices you make. And the choices he makes. Marcus stood, moving to the window to peer out into the moonlit gardens. Your power is growing stronger. Sarah says she can sense it. Soon it will be impossible to hide what you are. As if to prove his point, the small potted herb on my windowsill suddenly burst into vibrant bloom, its leaves growing lusher and more fragrant than they had any right to be in the dead of winter. Both Marcus and I stared at it in amazement. That's not supposed to happen, I breathed. No, it's not, which means we're running out of time. Marcus turned back to me, his expression urgent. There are factions at court who know what you are, Lord Blackwood chief among them. They're planning something, gathering support to move against you before your power fully manifests. Fear clawed at my throat. What kind of move? The kind that ends with you dead and buried in an unmarked grave. His words were brutal but necessary. Unless we can find a way to protect you first. How? Marcus reached into his cloak and pulled out a small leather pouch. There are others like you, survivors of the magical bloodlines who went into hiding after the purges. They've formed a network, a support system for those with power who need protection. You want me to run away? I want you to survive. His eyes were earnest, pleading. Come with me tonight. Let me take you to safety before it's too late. I stared at the pouch in his hands, at this offer of escape and sanctuary. It would be so easy to say yes, to flee into the darkness and leave behind the court intrigues and deadly games that surrounded me. But then I thought of storm-colored eyes and a voice saying my name like a prayer. I thought of the hunger and recognition I'd seen in the king's face, the barely controlled restraint that vibrated around him whenever we were near each other. "I can't," I whispered. Marcus's face fell. "You're making a mistake. Whatever you think you feel for him, whatever connection you imagine exists between you, it's not worth your life." But it wasn't just about feelings. Though I was beginning to understand that my attraction to the king was deeper and more dangerous than simple desire. It was about answers, about understanding why my mother had died in exile, about discovering the full extent of the power that flowed in my veins. "Give me 3 days," I said finally. 3 days to learn what I need to know. If I'm truly in danger, if there's no other way, then I'll come with you. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have convinced him. 3 days, he agreed reluctantly. "But if you're not ready to leave by then, I won't be able to help you. The network doesn't expose itself for those who choose to stay in danger." After he left, slipping away into the shadows as silently as he had come, I sat alone with my thoughts and the weight of impossible choices. Outside my window, the gardens stretched away into darkness, and somewhere in that maze of paths and hidden alcoves, I knew the king was probably walking sleeplessly as I was lying awake. Tomorrow, I decided I would seek the answers I needed. Tomorrow, I would confront the man who held my fate in his hands and demand to know the truth about my mother, about the past that bound us together, about the future that seemed determined to tear us apart. But tonight, I would try to prepare myself for the possibility that the answers I found might destroy any chance of the impossible thing that was growing between us, that fragile, dangerous connection that felt like falling in love with my own destruction. The next morning dawned grey and cold, the sky the colour of old pewter as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. I dressed with trembling hands, choosing my plainest dress as if simple clothes could somehow protect me from the conversation I was about to have. Lady Elvire was nowhere to be found, probably still meeting with Lord Blackwood and whatever other conspirators had gathered to discuss my fate. It made it easier to slip away from my chamber and make my way to the gardens, where I knew he would be. I found him by the old oak tree at the heart of the Queen's garden, standing with his back to me as he stared up at the gnarled branches. Even motionless, he radiated a dangerous energy that made the air around him feel charged with electricity. "You came," he said without turning around. "I wondered if you would. We need to talk." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "About my mother. About what you did to her family." His shoulders tensed, and when he finally turned to face me, his expression was carefully blank. But I could see the storm brewing in his eyes, the barely controlled emotions that threatened to break free. "What do you think you know?" he asked quietly. "I know that my mother was Lady Roslyn of the Summer bloodline. I know that you grew up together, that she trusted you, that she came to you for help when the magical families were being hunted." I took a step closer, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. "And I know that you betrayed her, that you ordered the execution of everyone she loved." Something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or regret. "Yes," he said simply. "I did. The casual admission hit me like a physical blow. Part of me had hoped he would deny it, would offer some explanation that made him less of a monster. But his honesty, brutal as it was, somehow made it worse. Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. He moved closer, and I could see the lines of exhaustion around his eyes, the weight of old guilt that seemed to press down on his shoulders. "Because I was young and frightened and convinced that it was the only way to save the kingdom from civil war." "You were afraid of her?" "I was afraid of what she represented. The magical bloodlines had become militant, using their power to challenge royal authority, threatening to tear the realm apart. My advisors, Lord Blackwood chief among them, convinced me that they had to be stopped before they destroyed everything our ancestors had built." I thought of the warm glow I'd felt from my fingertips the night before, of the herbs that bloomed under my touch. And did they? Did the magical families really threaten your crown? His laugh was bitter as winter wind. Some did. Some were content to live quietly, using their gifts for healing and growing and making the world a little more beautiful. But others, he shook his head. Others wanted to rule, wanted to use their magic to dominate those without power. The line between protection and persecution became blurred. So you chose to destroy them all rather than find another way. I chose to preserve the stability of the realm. But even as he said it, I could hear the doubt in his voice, the question of whether he had made the right choice. Your mother tried to convince me there was another path, that the magical families could be integrated into the existing power structure rather than eliminated. But I was surrounded by advisors who saw magic as inherently corrupting, who believed that allowing it to flourish would eventually lead to our destruction. And you believed them over her. I believed them because I was terrified. The admission seemed to tear something open inside him, because I had seen what unchecked magical power could do, had witnessed the devastation it could cause. Because I was a young king trying to hold together a fracturing kingdom, and the easy solution seemed like the right one. He stopped just arm's length away from me, close enough that I could see the pain etched in every line of his face. Your mother came to me one last time, the night before the final purge. She begged me to spare her family, offered to bind their power, to swear oaths of loyalty. She said, his voice broke slightly, she said she loved me, that she thought I loved her too. My heart clenched at the anguish in his voice. Did you love her? With everything I had. The words fell like stones into the silence between us. But I loved my duty more, or thought I did. I told her that personal feelings couldn't override the needs of the realm, that I couldn't make exceptions even for her. So she ran. She ran, and I never saw her again. I heard rumors over the years that she had found love with another man, that she had borne a child, that she was living quietly in some far-off village. I told myself it was better that way, that she was safer away from court, away from me. He reached out as if to touch my face, then let his hand fall back to his side. I never imagined she would send her daughter back to the very place that destroyed her family. I never imagined I would have to face the consequences of my choices in such a direct way. Is that what I am to you? I asked, fighting back tears I didn't want him to see. A consequence? A reminder of your guilt? You're a miracle, he said fiercely. You're living proof that something beautiful can survive even the worst mistakes. He struggled with the words, his composure finally cracking. You're the woman your mother would have become if I hadn't been such a coward. The admission hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure either of us was brave enough to cross. I could see the want in his eyes, the hunger that went deeper than simple desire. But I could also see the fear, the knowledge that caring for me would mean confronting all the ghosts he had spent 20 years trying to bury. What happens now? I whispered. Now? He stepped back, putting distance between us with visible effort. Now you choose. I can arrange for you to leave court quietly, set you up with a new identity far from here where your heritage won't matter. You can live the peaceful life your mother always wanted for you. And if I choose to stay? His jaw tightened. If you stay, you'll be in constant danger. Lord Blackwood and his faction know what you are. They're already making plans to eliminate you before your power fully manifests. Even I might not be able to protect you from what's coming. But you would try? I would die before I let them harm you. The vehemence in his voice sent shivers down my spine. But that might not be enough. The political situation is delicate, my authority is not absolute, and there are those who would see my protection of you as proof that I'm unfit to rule. I understood what he wasn't saying, that choosing to stay would mean choosing him, choosing whatever impossible relationship was growing between us, and that such a choice would put both of us at risk. I need time to think, I said finally. He nodded, though I could see the disappointment in his eyes. Don't take too long. Every day you remain here is another day closer to disaster. As I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. Lyra? I looked back to find him staring at me with an expression of such longing it made my chest ache. Your mother was wrong about one thing. I didn't choose duty over love. I chose fear over love, and I've regretted it every day since. I left him standing beneath the oak tree and made my way back to the castle with my heart pounding and my mind racing. 3 paths lay before me. Flight to safety with Marcus and his network of survivors, acceptance of the king's offer to relocate me somewhere peaceful and anonymous, or staying to face whatever danger awaited me at court. Each choice carried its own risks, its own potential rewards. But as I climbed the stone stairs to my chamber, I realized that only one of them felt like the truth of who I was becoming. Only one of them honored the memory of my mother while embracing the power that flowed in my blood. And only one of them might lead to the kind of love that could heal old wounds and create something new from the ashes of the past. That evening brought news that changed everything. Lady Elvire burst into my chamber without knocking, her face flushed with excitement and terror in equal measure. "Pack your things," she commanded, throwing a travelling cloak at me. "We leave for the countryside at first light." I caught the cloak, my heart sinking. "Why, what's happened?" "Lord Blackwood has convinced the High Council that you pose a threat to the realm's stability. They've issued a writ for your examination by the court's magical investigators." Her hands shook as she began pulling clothes from my small wardrobe. "Do you understand what that means?" I did. Magical investigators were executioners in scholarly robes, men who probed for traces of power with methods that rarely left their subjects alive. If they examined me, they would find exactly what they were looking for. And that would be the end of everything. "The king agreed to this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from Lady Elvire's expression. "His Majesty was outvoted by the council. Lord Blackwood presented evidence of your unusual behaviour and convinced enough nobles that immediate action was necessary." She paused in her packing to look at me with something approaching sympathy. "I'm sorry, child. I tried to protect you, but this has grown beyond my ability to control." A cold certainty settled over me. This was exactly what Marcus had warned me about, what the king had feared would happen. The political machine was in motion, and there would be no stopping it through normal channels. "When is the examination scheduled?" I asked quietly. "Tomorrow afternoon, but we'll be long gone by then, travelling under cover of darkness to my sister's estate in the northern provinces. You can live there quietly, perhaps take a new name." "No." The word came out with more force than I intended. "I won't run." Lady Elvire stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. "Child, they will kill you. The investigators don't examine suspected practitioners. They torture them until they confess, then execute them as enemies of the crown." "Then I'll have to make sure there's no examination." I moved to the window, looking out over the moonlit gardens where I had learned so many terrible truths. "Has anyone told the king about the council's decision?" He was present when the vote was taken. There was nothing he could do without appearing to favour you inappropriately, which would only fuel more speculation about improper relations between you. Improper relations. If only she knew how proper, how inevitable those relations felt to me now. The pull between the king and me had grown stronger with each revelation, each moment of honesty. It was more than attraction, more than the echo of his lost love for my mother. It was recognition of something that could be built from the ruins of the past, but only if we both survived long enough to build it. "Leave me," I said to Lady Elvire. "Go pack your own things if you want to flee, but I won't be coming with you." "You're making a terrible mistake." "Perhaps, but it's my mistake to make." After she left, muttering prayers and predictions of doom, I sat in the darkness and planned. Marcus had given me 3 days, but events were moving faster than either of us had anticipated. If I was going to act, it had to be tonight. The vial of my mother's oil felt warm in my hands as I uncorked it and breathed in its summer-sweet scent. Power pulsed through my veins in response, stronger than it had ever been before. The herb on my windowsill burst into even more extravagant bloom, its fragrance filling the small room with the essence of wild-growing things. For the first time since learning of my heritage, I didn't try to suppress the sensation. Instead, I embraced it, let it flow through me like a river finding its course. Golden light emanated from my skin, soft at first but growing brighter as I stopped fighting what I was. I was the last of the summer bloodline. I carried in my veins the power to make things grow, to coax life from seemingly barren ground, to nurture and heal and create beauty where none had existed before. This was my mother's gift to me, her legacy that no amount of political maneuvering could destroy. But I also carried something else, the potential for destruction that came with any great power. The ability to make things grow meant I could also make them wither. The magic that healed could also harm. The choice of what to do with such power was entirely mine. A soft knock at my door interrupted my contemplation. I quickly dimmed the glow around me and opened it to find Marcus standing in the corridor, his face grave. "I heard about the council's decision," he said without preamble. "We need to leave. Now." "I'm not going anywhere." His eyes widened as he took in my appearance, the way my skin still held traces of golden light. The way the air around me seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy. "Your power is manifesting fully. Do you have any idea how dangerous that makes you?" "Dangerous to whom?" I stepped aside to let him enter, then closed the door behind him. "To Lord Blackwood and his faction. Good. They should be afraid. To everyone, including yourself." Marcus moved closer, his voice urgent. "Untrained magical power is unpredictable, destructive. You could hurt innocent people without meaning to. Then train me." The words came out before I had fully formed the thought, but as soon as I spoke them, I knew they were right. "You said there were others, survivors, who went into hiding. They must have knowledge of how to control these abilities." "It takes years to learn proper control." "I don't have years. I have hours." I turned to face him fully, letting him see the determination in my eyes. "I won't run from this, Marcus. I won't let them drive me into exile like they did my mother. If I'm going to face the investigators tomorrow, I need to be ready to show them exactly what they're dealing with." Marcus stared at me for a long moment, and I could see the war between caution and admiration playing out across his features. "You're planning something reckless." "I'm planning something necessary." I moved to my traveling bag and began pulling out the few possessions I treasured most. The vial of oil, a few pieces of my mother's jewellery that Lady Elvira had allowed me to keep, a book of poetry that had belonged to my father. "Will you help me or not?" "If I help you, if I bring others of our kind into this, and your plan fails," he shook his head, "it could mean exposure for all of us. The network we've built to protect magical survivors could be destroyed. And if you don't help me, if you let Lord Blackwood and his investigators kill me tomorrow, what message does that send?" I faced him squarely. "That we're still so afraid, still so beaten down, that we'll let them murder us one by one rather than stand and fight?" Something shifted in his expression, a spark of the rebellion that must have driven him to help magical survivors all these years. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A demonstration." I moved to the window, looking out toward the castle's main courtyard where public executions were traditionally held. "Tomorrow, when they try to examine me, I want every member of the High Council, every noble, every servant, to see exactly what the Summer bloodline is capable of. I want them to understand that magic isn't something to be feared and destroyed. It's something that can make their world more beautiful. And if they don't see it that way, if they see your display of power as confirmation that magical practitioners need to be eliminated—" I thought of storm-coloured eyes and a voice thick with regret. I thought of my mother, who had tried diplomacy and died in exile. I thought of all the magical families who had been hunted and killed because they had chosen to hide rather than reveal the true nature of their gifts. "Then, at least they'll know we won't go quietly," I said. "At least they'll understand that destroying us comes with a cost." Marcus was quiet for a long time, weighing options I could only guess at. Finally, he nodded. "There are 3 others in the city, survivors who've been living quiet lives, hiding their abilities. If you're truly determined to do this, they should be the ones to help you prepare." "Bring them," I said without hesitation. "Tonight, we have until dawn to plan something that will either save my life or ensure my death has meaning." As Marcus slipped away to gather his compatriots, I returned to the window and gazed out at the gardens where I had learned to love a man who was both my salvation and my destruction. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning 20 years in the making. Tomorrow, the court would discover what happened when the last daughter of summer decided to bloom instead of wither. And somewhere in the castle, I knew the king was preparing for the same confrontation, making his own impossible choices about duty and desire, power and love. Whatever happened tomorrow, neither of us would emerge unchanged. They came in the darkest hour before dawn. 3 figures moving like shadows through the castle corridors. Marcus led them to my chamber where I waited, having spent the night in meditation and preparation for what was to come. The first was a woman perhaps 10 years older than myself, with prematurely grey hair and eyes like winter ice. Her name was Elena, and she carried the bloodline of the Frost families, those who could call ice from air and freeze water with a touch. The second was a man of middle years whose dark skin seemed to hold the warmth of a forge fire. Tobias bore the blood of the ember lines, capable of calling flame without tinder and warming hearts with his presence. The third was barely more than a boy, maybe 16 years old, with green eyes that spoke of deep forests and growing things. Like me, Kieran carried summer magic in his veins, though his power was focused on the ancient trees rather than flowering plants. "So," Eleanor said without preamble, studying me with those ice-pale eyes, "you're the one who wants to make a spectacle of herself before the council." "I want to show them what they've been trying to destroy," I corrected. "There's a difference." Tobias moved closer to the window, his presence warming the cold stone around him. "Marcus says your power is manifesting strongly, but without training. That's dangerous for all of us if it goes wrong." "It won't go wrong." I looked at each of them in turn, these survivors who had chosen to live in shadows rather than face the light. "Not if you help me understand what I'm capable of." Kieran spoke for the first time, his young voice carrying the whisper of wind through leaves. "What exactly are you planning to do during this examination?" I had been thinking about that all night, weighing options and possibilities. "They'll bring me to the courtyard, put me in chains, try to force a confession through pain and fear. Instead of confessing, I'm going to show them what real magic looks like." And then, Elena's question cut straight to the heart of the matter. "And then either they'll see the beauty in what we are, or they'll try to kill me. Either way, the hiding is over." The 4 of them exchanged glances loaded with meaning I couldn't quite decipher. Finally, Marcus nodded. "Show us what you can do now without training. Then we'll decide if this madness has any chance of success." I uncorked the vial of my mother's oil and let its scent fill the room. Immediately, power rushed through my veins like molten gold. The air around me began to shimmer, and every plant in the chamber responded. The herb on my windowsill burst into impossible bloom. Ivy began growing up the stone walls, and even the dried flowers in an old vase suddenly sprouted fresh green leaves. But more than that, I could feel the life force of everyone in the room, could sense the unique signature of their magical heritage. Eleanor felt like winter moonlight on snow, beautiful and distant and sharp enough to cut. Tobias radiated warmth like a banked fire, comfort and strength held in careful control. Kieran carried the deep patience of oak trees, the slow wisdom of things that grew for centuries. And underneath it all, threading through the castle like golden veins, I could sense other sources of power, magical bloodlines that had been hidden so well, even they might not know what they carried. "Remarkable," Elena breathed. "You're not just manifesting your own power, you're calling to the heritage of others." "The summer bloodlines were always the strongest connectors," Tobias said, his voice filled with something approaching awe. "They could sense and awaken the magic in others, help dormant bloodlines remember what they were capable of." Kieran moved closer, his eyes wide with wonder. "Can you feel the king? Marcus says he watches you, that there's something between you. Can you sense his magical signature?" I let my awareness expand, reaching through the stone walls and corridors toward the royal quarters. And there, burning like a beacon in the darkness, I found him, awake as I was awake, pacing his chambers with the same restless energy that thrummed through my veins. But it wasn't just insomnia, I sensed. It was power. "He has magic," I gasped, the revelation hitting me like a physical blow. "The king carries magical blood." The others stared at me in shock. "That's impossible," Marcus said. "The royal line is pure mortal, has been for generations." "No." I could feel it clearly now, a heritage that had been buried so deep he probably didn't know it existed. It's distant, maybe 3 or 4 generations back, but it's there. Something connected to growing things, to the earth itself. Eleanor's laugh was sharp with irony. "So, the man who ordered the destruction of the magical bloodlines carries their heritage in his own veins. There's a justice to that. More than justice, I said, understanding flooding through me. Don't you see? This is why he was able to order the purges. He was fighting the magic in his own blood, denying what he was. And this is why he's drawn to me now, why he can't stay away despite the danger. Recognition, Tobias said softly. Magic calling to magic. I nodded, my heart racing with the implications. If I can awaken his power during the examination, if I can show the council that their own king carries the heritage they're trying to destroy. It would change everything, Kieran finished. The political balance, the laws against magic, the entire foundation of the current system. It would also be the most dangerous gamble any of us has ever attempted, Eleanor pointed out. If you're wrong, if his power doesn't manifest, you'll have just committed treason in front of the entire court. And if you're right, Marcus added grimly, you might destroy him along with yourself. A king who's revealed to have magical heritage would face rebellion from his own nobles. I thought about that, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. The king had spent 20 years carrying the guilt of what he'd done to my mother's family. If I could show him that he was one of us, that he had been fighting his own nature all this time. He deserves to know the truth, I said finally, whatever the consequences. The others spent the next few hours teaching me what they could about control, about focusing power rather than simply releasing it. Eleanor showed me how to create barriers of energy that could protect against physical harm. Tobias demonstrated techniques for warming others from within, for kindling hope and courage in frightened hearts. Kieran shared the deep grounding exercises that connected magical practitioners to the living earth beneath their feet. By the time the sun rose over the castle walls, I felt more prepared than I had any right to feel. Not trained, there hadn't been time for true training, but aware of my capabilities and determined to use them wisely. Are you certain about this? Marcus asked as my new teachers prepared to slip away before the castle fully awakened. No, I admitted. But I'm certain that running and hiding isn't the answer anymore. My mother tried to make peace through diplomacy and died in exile. I'm going to try a different approach. Eleanor paused at the door, looking back at me with something that might have been admiration. Your mother would be proud of you. And terrified. Good, I said. That means I'm doing something worth doing. After they left, I dressed carefully in the finest gown Lady Elvia had provided, deep blue silk that brought out the colour of my eyes, with silver embroidery that caught the morning light. If I was going to face the council, I would do it looking like the noble daughter I was, not the servant girl they expected me to be. A knock at my doctor announced the arrival of the guards who would escort me to my examination. As I walked through the castle corridors flanked by armed men, I could feel eyes watching from doorways and windows. Servants, nobles, courtiers, all of them drawn by the spectacle of the girl who had dared to catch the king's attention. But none of them knew what they were really about to witness. None of them understood that this examination would become the moment when everything changed, when the hidden magic in their bloodlines awakened to the call of summer power. As we approached the courtyard where my fate would be decided, I caught a glimpse of familiar storm-coloured eyes watching from a high window. The king stood motionless as a statue, but I could feel the tension radiating from him, the battle between duty and desire that had torn him apart for 20 years. Today, I would give him the chance to choose differently than he had chosen with my mother. Today, we would both discover what we were truly capable of when love and magic intertwined. The courtyard was filled to capacity when the guards led me to the centre of the ancient stones. Nobles in their finest robes formed a semicircle around the examination platform, their faces masks of curiosity and barely concealed bloodlust. The High Council sat in judgment on raised chairs, with Lord Blackwood prominent among them, his dark eyes fixed on me with predatory satisfaction. And there, on a throne that had been carried down from the great hall, sat the king. His expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the storm brewing behind his eyes, could feel the barely contained power that pulsed beneath his royal composure. The magical investigators stood ready with their instruments of torture disguised as tools of inquiry, iron chains that would burn any practitioner who touched them, needles that could draw blood for testing, devices designed to force confessions through pain rather than truth. Lyra, ward of Lady Elvire, Lord Blackwood's voice rang across the courtyard. You stand accused of practicing forbidden magic within the bounds of this realm. How do you answer these charges? I stood straight and tall, letting the morning sunlight catch the embroidery of my gown. I answer that magic is not something to be practiced or forbidden, my lord. It simply is. Like breathing, like the beating of one's heart. A murmur ran through the assembled crowd. This was not the cowering denial they had expected from a servant girl facing execution. Defiance will only make your examination more thorough, Lord Blackwood said with cold satisfaction. Master Aldrich, prepare your instruments. The chief investigator stepped forward, a thin man with dead eyes and hands that had spilled more magical blood than any soldier's sword. He gestured to his assistants, who began arranging chains and sharp implements on a table that had been set up for the purpose. Actually, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the still air, I don't think that will be necessary. And then I let my power free. It started small, a warmth that spread from my skin to the air around me, a golden glow that made the morning sunlight seem pale by comparison. The stones beneath my feet began to crack, not from destruction but from creation, as tiny green shoots pushed through the ancient mortar. The crowd gasped and stepped back as ivy erupted from the cracks, growing with impossible speed to wind around the pillars that supported the courtyard's galleries. Flowers burst into bloom along the walls, roses and jasmine and morning glories that filled the air with their perfume. But that was just the beginning. I reached out with my awareness, calling to every trace of magical heritage in the assembled crowd. Hidden bloodlines that had been dormant for generations suddenly sparked to life. A young nobleman found frost crystals forming around his fingers as his inherited ice magic awakened. A serving girl in the gallery began to glow with inner fire as ember blood remembered its purpose. Throughout the crowd, people stared in wonder at their hands as magic they had never known they possessed answered my summons. Impossible, Master Aldrich breathed, his instruments forgotten as he watched power bloom around him like flowers after rain. Not impossible, I said, turning to address the crowd directly. Just hidden, buried, denied for so long that you forgot what you were capable of. Lord Blackwood was on his feet now, his face twisted with rage and fear. Stop this! Stop this at once! Guards, seize her! But the guards were experiencing their own awakenings. Men who had served the crown without question now found their heritage singing in their blood. Stone singers who could speak to the castle's foundations. Stormcallers who could command wind and rain. Light-bearers who could banish darkness with a thought. None of them moved to obey Lord Blackwood's command. I turned my attention to the king, letting my power reach out to the magical signature I had sensed in him the night before. He had risen from his throne, his knuckles white where they gripped its arms, his entire body rigid with the effort of restraining forces he didn't understand. Let it come, I called to him across the courtyard. Stop fighting what you are. His eyes met mine, and in that moment of connection, 20 years of buried guilt and denied heritage erupted to the surface. Power flowed from him like water from a broken dam, earth magic, deep and strong and nurturing as summer soil. The stones of the courtyard began to shift, not cracking but flowering, as mineral veins transformed into living crystal that caught and reflected the golden light radiating from my skin. No, Lord Blackwood snarled, drawing a dagger from his robes. I will not allow this corruption to spread. He lunged toward me, the blade aimed at my heart, but the king moved faster than humanly possible. His magic had awakened something primal in him, the protective instincts of a predator whose mate was threatened. He caught Lord Blackwood's wrist in a grip that could shatter bone, and the dagger fell harmlessly to the flowering stones. Touch her, the king said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder, and I will bury you so deep in the earth that flowers will bloom from your bones. The threat was both literal and terrifying. Lord Blackwood's face went white as he realized that his carefully laid plans had not only failed but had awakened the very thing he feared most, a magical king whose power dwarfed anything the old bloodlines had ever achieved, walked toward them through the garden that had erupted from the ancient stones, my gown trailing through flowers that bloomed at my approach. The assembled crowd parted before me like a sea, nobles and servants alike staring in wonder at the transformation of their sterile courtyard into something from a fairy tale. "Lord Blackwood," I said when I stood before him, close enough to see the terror in his eyes. "You wanted to examine me for signs of magical power. Are you satisfied with what you've found?" He couldn't speak, could only stare as golden light continued to pulse from my skin. As flowers continued to bloom wherever I stepped, I turned to address the crowd, my voice carrying to every corner of the transformed courtyard. "This is what you've been trying to destroy for 20 years. Not weapons or tools of war, but the power to create beauty, to bring life to barren places, to heal what has been wounded." I gestured to the nobles who were still marveling at their own newly awakened abilities. "This heritage flows in many of your veins. You are the descendants of the very people you've been taught to fear." A young woman in the gallery found her voice first. "What does this mean for us? For the kingdom?" It was the king who answered, his voice carrying the absolute authority of divine right, tempered now by magical power. "It means we rebuild. It means we stop running from what we are and start embracing what we could become." He looked directly at me, and I saw love and wonder and terrifying possibility in his storm-colored eyes. "It means we learn from the mistakes of the past and create something better." Lord Blackwood made one last desperate attempt to salvage his position. "Your Majesty, surely you cannot mean to embrace this corruption. Think of what the neighboring kingdoms will say, what your nobles will do." "My nobles," the king said quietly, "seem to be discovering that they have more in common with magical practitioners than they ever imagined." He gestured to the crowd around us, where ice crystals and small flames and growing things continued to manifest as hidden bloodlines awakened. "As for neighboring kingdoms, they will learn to accept what we've become or face the consequences of opposing us." The threat was unmistakable, and Lord Blackwood finally understood that his war against magic had been lost the moment my power called to the king's buried heritage. "Master Aldrich," the king continued, addressing the chief investigator who still stood frozen among his abandoned instruments, "you and your assistants are relieved of your duties. The practice of examining citizens for magical abilities is hereby ended." "And Lord Blackwood?" I added, stepping closer to the man who had orchestrated so much suffering. "Will have the opportunity to learn exactly how merciful magical practitioners can be. Despite everything you've done, despite every life you've helped destroy, I'm not going to kill you." Relief flickered across his face, quickly replaced by wariness as he waited for the rest of my pronouncement. "Instead, you're going to help us," I continued. "You're going to use your knowledge of the kingdom's political structure to help integrate magical practitioners back into society. You're going to spend the rest of your life making amends for the harm you've caused." "And if I refuse?" The king's smile was sharp as a blade. "Then you'll discover that earth magic can create far more unpleasant prisons than any dungeon we've ever built." As the crowd began to disperse, still talking excitedly about the miracles they had witnessed, the king and I found ourselves alone in the transformed courtyard. Flowers bloomed around our feet, and the air shimmered with residual magic. "So," he said softly, reaching out to cup my face in his hands, "what happens now?" I leaned into his touch, feeling the warmth of his earth magic intertwining with my summer power. "Now we have the conversation we should have had 20 years ago. Now we learn whether love can really overcome the mistakes of the past. And if it can't?" I smiled, letting golden light flow from my skin to his, watching wonder bloom in his eyes as our magic danced together like lovers reunited after a long separation. "Then we'll create something new from the ashes of what was destroyed. We'll build a kingdom where power is used to nurture rather than dominate, where magic and mortality can coexist." He kissed me then, there in the courtyard filled with impossible flowers. And I tasted 20 years of regret and longing and hope for redemption. When we broke apart, both of us were glowing with intertwined power. Gold and green, summer warmth and earth's strength. Two magics that had found their perfect complement. "I love you," he whispered against my lips. "I loved your mother, but I love you more. You're not just the echo of what I lost. You're the promise of what we could build together." "Then let's build it," I said, taking his hand and feeling our magic pulse in harmony. "Let's create a kingdom worthy of the people we've discovered we can be." As we walked hand in hand from the courtyard, leaving behind the last remnants of the old world's fears and prejudices, I felt my mother's spirit finally at peace. The exile was over, the hiding was finished, the summer bloodline had returned to claim its place in the light. And in the distance, I could hear Marcus and his network of magical survivors finally daring to hope that their long wait in the shadows was coming to an end. The age of magic had begun again, born from love and nurtured by the belief that beauty was always stronger than fear. I hope this story brought you the emotional journey and dramatic romance you were seeking. If you enjoyed this tale of forbidden love, magical awakening, and political intrigue, please consider leaving a comment with your thoughts and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share this with friends who love dark fantasy romance and let me know what kind of story you'd like to see next. Your engagement helps me create more content that speaks to hearts yearning for adventure, passion, and the triumph of love over fear.